Also breaking this morning, time is up for TikTok. The popular social media platform is unavailable to users in the U.S. When you open the app, you see this message stating that a law banning TikTok has been enacted in the U.S.
Fascist countries ban apps. Fascist countries ban websites.
I'm never forgiving you.
You cannot fear
and I'm never going to trust you ever.
Mr. Beast just paid 2.7.
I gotta keep it real. I am crashing the fuck out right now. I don't know what to do.
The message goes on to say that TikTok is fortunate that President-elect Trump has indicated he will work on a solution to reinstate TikTok once he takes office.
And as of today, TikTok is back.
Now I'm rooting for Trump? Ew! God, like, make America fucking great again,
Does
I
anyone
guess.
out there think this is a distraction?
I don't give a fuck if he stops the world from fucking aliens. I'm not thanking that nigga for shit.
And pleased to have the support of a president who truly understands our platform. One who has used TikTok to express his own thoughts and perspectives.
Hello, my name is Kayla Says, your favorite video essayist turned tour guide through the end of the world, and welcome to Jackass. So today, if you haven't already guessed, we're talking about the TikTok ban. We're talking about how it happened, how we got here, what it all means, what could happen next, and to give proper context to the situation, I spoke with Kat Tenbarge, who is a tech and culture reporter at NBC News. Kat is fantastic. She's been covering this story from the very beginning, and I will link all of her information for you to connect with her in the description down below. So this situation has changed hands so many times to the point where it is now bleeding over to the third US government administration to be dealing with it, and so I don't blame people for being confused and losing the plot. So we're going to start from the beginning, and what if I told you that the beginning had to do with the shenanigans of a group of K-pop stans?
So the first time that a presidential administration moved to ban TikTok was in 2020 when Trump was still president. There were a couple of things leading up to an executive order he issued to ban TikTok. And I think the most notable thing that got the most mainstream media attention is that in June, he had a rally planned in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And someone involved with his campaign at the time had been posting online like, we are going to get record turnout for this rally. We're surpassing like 800,000 people have RSVP'd for this rally. And Trump himself was saying like, we're going to have 1 million people wanting to turn out for this rally in Tulsa. What they didn't realize is that on TikTok, there was a coordinated movement started by K-pop fans of BTS specifically, who had decided to engineer this sort of prank where they would go and they would sign up online. There was an open link to RSVP for the rally. So tons of those numbers, tons of those people came from this TikTok effort to kind of embarrass Trump and get him to overinflate the size of his rally turnout. And then when the rally actually happened, it was, of course, significantly lower than what he had said. So that was June 2020. And then 2 months later, in August 2020, Trump issues an executive order to ban TikTok, citing national security concerns because of its Chinese parent company.
So for a while, the TikTok ban was exclusively a Republican issue due to the modern-day Republican Party sentiments toward China and the Chinese government. But in this day and age, you really can't get a sweeping legislation like this passed without some bipartisan influence. So what was the big measure of bipartisanship that pushed it through to the other end?
Tonight at University of Texas Austin, police one by one detaining pro-Palestinian protesters. More than 1,000 people have been arrested since the demonstrations across college campuses against the war in Gaza began.
These students here, there are hundreds of them. They were not able to get into the encampment, so they are now attempting to storm one of the buildings here.
We demand divestment. We will not be moved unless by force.
But we did not see this huge bipartisan fervor around banning the app until sort of the end of 2023 going into 2024, which is when the legislation actually passed. And what also happened at that time is that Obviously, October 7th had occurred, and on TikTok, you saw a massive swell of pro-Palestinian sentiment. And this included viral efforts like boycotting Starbucks, boycotting McDonald's. I remember covering this for NBC News. It was getting a lot of mainstream attention, and AIPAC and other sort of big money pro-Israel donors were speaking out about TikTok's influence and characterizing it as a radicalizing force. And a lot of people in Congress get their information about social media platforms not by actually using the platforms themselves. They form their opinion around it based on things like mainstream news outlets that they follow, as well as lobbyists. And when it comes to who spends a lot of money on lobbying members of Congress, AIPAC and the pro-Israel lobby is a huge monetary force.
And if you think about it in this context, it makes perfect sense, right? One of the main issues that both Democrats and Republicans have been ideologically aligned on within the last 5 years is their unwavering support of Israel. And if you still don't believe it, Mitt Romney pretty much admitted it in this interview.
A small parenthetical point, which is some wonder why there was such overwhelming support for us to shut down potentially TikTok or other entities of that nature. If you look at the postings on TikTok and the number of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media sites, it's overwhelmingly so among TikTok broadcasts.
So yes, a big surge in this bipartisan support without necessarily thinking through all of the implications can be traced back to the Palestine protests. And this idea that a social media app was being unregulated by American interests, and therefore could have massive influence over the youth of today. At the same time though, those American interests like big tech were also interested in diminishing TikTok's value for monetary reasons. And so the more negative sentiment that TikTok had, the better it was for them.
Another really big monetary force that was proven to be pushing anti-TikTok narratives was Meta. Meta spends a ton of money on lobbying Congress, and even before the pro-Palestinian sentiment, there was also sort of a rash of news articles that characterized TikTok as a place where like dangerous and harmful trends for kids were emerging. And a lot of this stuff was not really true. It would be cherry-picked videos. Some of the trends actually started on Facebook, but it's this type of stuff that was convincing Congress to really push toward this and develop the momentum to ban TikTok. Former President Biden signed the law that would force a sale of TikTok back in April of last year, which was a long time ago. And what that law actually said is that TikTok and ByteDance would have 270 days to divest the app from its Chinese parent company. So what TikTok needed to do was sell to an American owner. However, it's worth noting that basically immediately, both leading up to President Biden signing the bill and afterward, TikTok said it was not interested in selling. And a lot of experts sort of flagged that it would be near impossible for TikTok to do that for a number of reasons. It's a really short time frame when it comes to that type of massive sale of such a huge company and such a proprietary technology. And then in addition to that, the technology that TikTok uses is a global network. So you have people working on TikTok's source code all around the world. It would be logistically challenging, if not impossible, for TikTok to complete a sale, even if they wanted to. And they always said they did not. Also, a lot of representatives who voted for the legislation referred to it as a TikTok ban themselves, which kind of gave away the game plan. While other people who supported the legislation, like Representative Jeff Jackson, who has a massive TikTok presence himself, he said that he expected it to sell, which obviously it did not.
Okay, so before this ban even goes into place, there are a lot of emotional reactions and frustration from folks on TikTok, whether they're actual creators with established platforms or just people who regularly use and engage with the app. And I think your opinion on whether or not those reactions were valid or whether or not people were overreacting or underreacting depends on a couple different things. Some of those things include how much you know about the creator economy, whether or not you view TikTok as a time-wasting app or a source of community and entrepreneurship for, regular people, or, how you feel about national security and the Chinese government. And these are a lot of things to distill down into one definitive statement of TikTok good versus TikTok bad. So for this section, I'll be giving my own thoughts and talking to some folks with large platforms on TikTok as well. So thank you so much to Megan and Rumi for joining us today. Their information will be down below.
Overall, like, this is bigger than just TikTok. Like, the TikTok ban and the flip-flopping and a lot of like the narratives around like why TikTok was saved and who saved it are a lot bigger than just like the app going away. Because like, as a creator, like, yeah, that's a big source of our income. And just like part of our like exposure to like different opportunities and stuff like that. But it's also just like means of communication. Like, it's a way for our generation, for younger people to organize, to build community, to have these online spaces that are unique from like any other social media app. Like, you don't get a TikTok algorithm on any other social platform like that. That's why people are on TikTok. So taking that away from both creators and from just consumers and audience members means that we're losing those communication platforms, and we're losing ways to access people and to tap into people that we normally wouldn't or honestly can't in other platforms.
But yeah, TikTok is not a perfect app. I think the way we receive information on it can often be as harmful as it is helpful. I think the constant pushing of the shop features is weird and unnecessary. If it's collecting my data or spying on me, that's bad, but so is every other American app. The thing about TikTok is that for most people, it's a distraction. It's their downtime. They don't care about the national security implications for using it, and no one in Congress has given them a good reason to, especially considering everything else going on in the world right now that they have actively chosen to do nothing about. And for some people, the app has become a part of their income and their livelihood, just like YouTube is a part of mine. Whether I like the company behind the app or not, I'm not actively cheering on that loss. I don't know why anyone would.
Usually I am a character designer and visual development artist in the animation industry, but lately, for anyone who knows about the entertainment industry right now, gigs have been pretty patchy. So I own and operate a small business that I advertise online, mainly on TikTok in between my gigs. And I have been making practically my entire income from TikTok since July 2024. So when people are like, oh, it's just a stupid app, like, it's not that deep. It's a lot of people's, especially people who run small businesses, it's their entire lives, it's their whole livelihood. As someone who's both worked like the 9-to-5 corporate gigs and also done work on social media and made money in both places, I think people are not acknowledging that like some of those like 9-to-5 jobs like just don't exist anymore. A lot of these jobs are getting outsourced now, or they're being replaced by AI. A lot of people were like, oh, you have to get a real job now. Some people like me don't really have a job to go back to.
Was I crying when the app was banned? No. I lived through Vine. I lived through Twitter becoming the Fourth Reich. Actually, that's kind of not true. I got banned twice. But I've seen a lot of folks talking about how the only people allowed to have an emotional response to this were the people making good, honest money from it, whatever that means, and that people who were just using the app don't have anything to actually be sad about. And I reject that premise solely based on the fact that the internet isn't fun anymore. It's a corporate hellscape. Outside isn't fun anymore either. We've eliminated third spaces and further isolated ourselves from communities, and the only things that we can engage in are also corporate hellscapes. I'm not saying TikTok fixes these ills in our society, but for the kids who view this as the government taking away their funny video app because they don't give a fuck about what they enjoy, yeah, I get it. Social media is truly the downfall of society, sure, but our community infrastructure is not in a place to fill that void anytime soon because we've privatized it all to fuck. And the American government doesn't care about what slop you're looking at, they just want it to be their slop. The last thing I want to mention here is China's actual place in all of this, specifically because I think some of you guys don't view Chinese people as like real people. Basically, there was a blip here where people decided that to protest the TikTok ban, they were going to go to a more explicitly owned and communicated Chinese app called RedNote. I never got a RedNote account, but from what I understand, it's like a combo of Pinterest and TikTok, which is interesting, but yeah, Americans started downloading the app and having a cultural exchange with the folks over there, which doesn't happen often, and I think it is a little bizarre that we started gawking at them like they're zoo animals. Chinese people are not their government, and a lot lot of you have been taught to hate them, but you don't even know why. And that's not to say that China has a perfect society or human rights record either, they definitely don't. But I've been seeing a lot of discourse about the dangers of Gen Z being pro-China because we always have to have this big looming enemy that we don't understand, and well, that's not Russia anymore. But here's the thing, big tech shrunk the world down, and when you have the power of different perspectives in the literal palm of your hand, the next best thing that big tech can do to maintain that control is to throttle the voices being heard.
Sorry, TikTok isn't available right now. A law banning TikTok has been enacted in the US. Unfortunately, that means you can't use TikTok for now. We are fortunate that President Trump has indicated that he will work with us on a solution to reinstate TikTok once he takes office. Please stay tuned. Learn more, close out.
It was really shocking to see that kind of clear verbiage used in these messages because it really was a billboard for, you know, up to 170 million Americans to see this very pro-Trump message on one of their dominant forms of entertainment. And so even before the election, and especially right after the election, TikTok was clearly, you know, starting to look at the candidates and their opinions and their stances on TikTok and how they could use that to their advantage. So Trump used TikTok heavily to campaign for the election, as did Biden and Kamala Harris. But Trump was really successful on TikTok in a way that they weren't. And so as soon as Trump won the election, the CEO of TikTok went to Mar-a-Lago and brought this data to him and was like, look at how popular you are on TikTok. This probably contributed to your success. And so it seems like Trump really took that to heart because his positioning on TikTok has been like, oh, you know, Americans actually love this place and maybe this is good for the country. And so maybe it's good if I save this. But you did see kind of this political skirmishing in the fact that the law set a 270-day deadline. That deadline fell exactly on the last day that Biden was in office. But in the days leading up to it, you see the Biden administration try to distance itself from the effects of this law that they put into motion and say, actually, we're not going to enforce, we're going to push this to President Trump.
So this means that TikTok is saved, right, guys? Everything's so fine now. Everything's so fine. Like it was all just a big oopsie, a big misunderstanding. Like it's all good. Like it's all good.
Our algorithms are not TikTok algorithms.
I'm not gonna lie, like TikTok is back, but like something's off. Like the quality is terrible. Like,
But I am telling you right now, that motherfucker back there is not real.
I don't know. As a creator, it doesn't feel the same. I don't know what my future looks like on TikTok, especially now since like we don't have like a 90-day extension at 75. I don't know. I think the creator environment would be a little different. I don't know if advertisers, if the monetization of TikTok will be the same now that it's sort of in like this temporary state. But I don't know. It's just a big question mark for me right now.
The vibes are off, Kayla. It is weird. I feel like we're all like, it's sinking in that like the government, in my feelings and opinions, held all of our livelihoods over our heads in service to like a political ad. It is weird.
I think it's just so interesting because above all else, Trump is an optics guy, and that plays so well within like the way that social media algorithms work in a way that I think the Democrats aren't. Like Trump simply was like, oh, this is popular, I'm going to reverse my stance on it, and I'm going to look like the hero.
Exactly. I think going into the 2016 to 2020 presidential administration under Trump, you had a very different environment culturally, politically, online, and when it came to the sources of news and information for the majority of people. There was more of a reactionary sort of resistance stance to things that might happen under the first Trump presidency, whereas with the second Trump presidency, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing people really sort of move to comply with Trump's desires in advance, and nowhere is that clearer than in the world of big tech. Because so much has shifted in the social media landscape over the past 8 years. And what we've seen is that not only Trump, but conservatives more broadly, have used social media to their advantage. You look at how influencers who were previously apolitical have come out in favor of Trump and conservatism in the past year. And I think that not only does Trump have that sort of powerful arsenal of influencers in a way that the Democratic Party does not, but he now also has the approval and the support and the ear of the people who are in charge of these social media platforms. So when you look at the Democratic Party, they have not delivered in this regard in the same way. And I think there are a lot of different reasons for that. One being that when you look at who the biggest creators reaching young people, reaching massive audiences are, who are leftist, who are left-leaning, they're not necessarily the same influencers that the Democratic Party is targeting. I think that their TikTok strategy really points to this because they brought in influencers who themselves were somewhat apolitical, people who weren't really talking about political issues, and they ignore and sort of push out people like Hassan Piker as just one example, who has the biggest Twitch base, the biggest streamer base for leftist politics, who is not going to be embraced by the Democratic Party, in part because he is more critical of the Democratic Party than some of these other influencers. But what Trump has been doing for almost a decade now is shifting the entire Republican Party apparatus to meet where these influencers, like these extreme far-right perspectives are, whereas the Democratic Party has remained in the center and has not shifted to meet these perspectives on the other side.
I talk about this on like my channels, but like critical thinking is more important than ever. And I think unfortunately, because of the way that the internet and the way the internet culture has been set up, the way that our education systems have been set up and have been going over the past couple of years, it's becoming less and less common and also like cool to critically think and to think more deeply into things as to like why this is, because this didn't all just like happen. Like it didn't appear. Like there have been steps along the way, and there have been many of times where things just kind of went unchecked or scrutinized to the level that they should have been. And it's really a spooky time. It's a scary time.
Okay, so I guess the point that I want to leave you with is that most of the dominant social media channels here in the US are now under the thumb of technocratic billionaires who are, aligning themselves with the Republican Party and the Trump administration. An advantage that President Trump did not have going into his first term. I ultimately have no idea what this means for the future of the apps that you love. What I do know is that the internet has a chronic misinformation problem, and it's about to get considerably worse. The right has dominated the game of misinformation and propaganda in a way that Democratic and leftist circles, quite frankly, cannot keep up with at the moment for one reason or another. And so the most important thing that you can do is educate yourself and understand when you are being shown something that might not tell the whole story. I could do an entire separate video on this, but this has a lot to do with the decline in distrust in institutions like the American mainstream media. Most folks my age and younger consume news by watching somebody else commentate over it or watching somebody summarize it in their bedroom. And I understand the need to do that. I understand the need for accessibility in news when everything is covered in paywalls and coded language and things that like don't get you the information that you need in an adequate amount of time. I know our attention spans are getting shorter, and I know a lot of mainstream media outlets are not catching up in that way yet, right? Like I get why, commentary of news is more attractive than consuming news from the sources, and that's totally valid. But what I am going to say is like, question the people in their bedroom telling you things. And I say that as somebody who is currently in their apartment telling you things. Question me too. I try to do my due diligence, but I get stuff wrong, and I'm willing to admit that. But there's a lot of bad people out there who aren't willing to admit that. It's a scary world out there. It's a new world out there. I don't know what's going to happen. And I guess the best thing that I can leave you with as we enter this new era of American politics and policy is to take care of yourself and the people around you. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you next time.
But if you're asking